All right, my friends, we're back. We're live. We had some technical difficulties last week, but that's not going to stop us tonight because it's all fixed. Should be good to go. And you can see me. Type something in the chat. Give me your favorite food in the chat. All-time favorite food. Or like something that would just be like really tasty right now. This will help me see if you guys can hear me. Awesome. I sound great. That's good. All right, so tonight's just like general question. Type something in the chat of your favorite food. So there's a bunch of you guys in here, so if it's quiet, I'm not sure. Maybe you guys are just looking to, I don't know, just lay back and watch. You don't really want to write anything. That's fine. Honey roasted ham. Wow. All right. I'm not a ham eater personally. I don't know, but all for that. Kimchi stew. You know what's super crazy about kimchi is I just read something about this person that got ordered like a Korean barbecue bowl, like without the kimchi, without the barbecue. And I was like, what are you doing? Why get Korean barbecue if you're not going to get kimchi? Anyways. All right. So let's get going so that we can hit on everything that's important. So you guys can type in the chat at any point, talk to each other, post questions, whatever. The easiest way, though, to ask me questions is to post it in the ask a question piece, which is right next to the poll, which if you haven't done the poll, it's worth it to do that. It just gives me a sense of what you're studying right now. The other things you need to know, if the chat, a lot of people come in, the chat gets kind of crazy, you can always minimize that if you just want to focus on what we're going to talk about. I sent these slides last week. Let me actually. Okay, well, let me send you the link for the slides, actually, so that you have them. I sent these last week, and instead of emailing them again, I'll just post them in the chat right now. But basically, tonight we're going to be focused on migrations, on everything you got to know, to be able to answer multiple choice questions and free response questions whenever you have a test coming up. Migrations, just like population, is a really foundational unit. It really touches on, a lot of the other things that are going to come up throughout the year in terms of agriculture and culture, cities. There's so many different factors, politics that come into this. And so, it's really important that you have a good understanding of what migrations will be all about. All right. So here is the link if you are following along. You want to jump into the slides. And like I said, type in the chat, stop me at any point, type in, ask a question. I'm here for you guys so that you can do well on your upcoming assessments. So if you can't stay, that's cool. The replay, although, will only be available for 5 members. So if you are looking to become a 5 member, the link is also below the video. It says replays and future live sessions. So I'm going to jump in and, stop me anytime with your questions so that you feel good to go. So going too fast. All right. So really, all of like world history is essentially a history, a story of constant movement. Humans have always moved around. That's sort of, foundational to humans, right? Like we move, we don't stay in one spot. But there's something that always forces us to move or motivates us to move. And then we always have to decide on where to go. And so when you look at human geography, that's what you're focused on, right? You still have to know this kind of history of movement. And I'm going to touch on some of the big historical migrations that you really have to know for this class. But in terms of like, how do you study these things as a human geographer? It's less about like what happened and it's more about why, right? Like, why did people move around and what effect did that have on the people themselves and on the places that they left and the places that they go to? That's sort of the difference between, a human geographer and a historian. So even though we're going to look at some big historic moments tonight, it's not about memorizing the dates and the people and all those things. It's really about understanding the patterns and how they affect today. Okay, so, one of the earliest human movements is, of course, these like early human migrations. So this map is specifically called like the out of Africa theory. The idea is that humans as a species originated in Africa, right? In that like central eastern portion of Africa. And from there, because of climate, because of droughts, lack of resources, all different reasons, humans left, right? They migrated. And of course, some stayed, but humans migrated out. And so you can see on this map how long it took humans to get to different places, all the way up until about 11,000, or let's say 1,000 years ago is the point in which the whole earth is pretty much inhabited, which, is relatively not that long. So, this is worth it to see as just like, this is a story of movement. That is what world history is based on. We exist in all these different places and have built different cultures and belief systems and politics. But we all got there at a certain time, and, why we move around this is what we're focused on. Okay. All right. So, let's see. Okay. So again, pause me, let me know when you need me to answer any questions. Okay, so we're going to talk about push and pull factors for the next several minutes. All right, so ultimately, these are like, human geography is really all knowing vocabulary, right? So there's so many different terms for you to know, and I highly recommend getting on Quizlet and studying these terms every single day. Because if you know the terms, you're going to kill it on the test. So two of the terms that you really need to know for migrations are push factor and pull factor. Okay, so push factor is basically why someone leaves a place. And there's a lot of different reasons we're going to talk about. Sometimes they're forced to leave. Sometimes other issues, effectively force them to leave, right? If there's not enough food or I'm in danger. And sometimes there's just, it's not necessarily bad, but I gotta go. I can't stay here, right? So we're in this session, we're not just talking about migrations between countries. That's part of it, right? People move from country to country. We're also just talking about just people moving. So if I move from this street to that street, I'm migrating, right? Why? What made me leave this place? And then if I'm leaving this place, now I'm going to somewhere. This is a pull factor. Why am I moving over there? Why did I choose that street, that city, that town, that country? Why there? So these are the two like foundational terms. These are the, push and pull factor, kind of explain everything, right? So let's go through them. All right, so in terms of push, there are economic factors. So economic is anything that has to do with money, right? Jobs, class, trade, anything that has to do with money. So a reason to leave, something that makes you leave where you live, could be unemployment. You can't find a job, right? So you got to work to survive. You need money to buy things, to feed your children, to eat. If you can't find a job, that's a problem. So if I can't find a job where I live, I need to get out of here. I can't stay here. Another reason could be a high cost of living, right? I've lived in this house forever. Now the rent is too high. I can't stay here. I can't afford this rent, or maybe I can afford this rent, but I'm not saving any money. So it's not worth it for me to stay here. So now I need to leave, right? And I don't need to travel across the world, but I can't stay here. Okay. Some of the other issues would be things like social. Okay, so social is really anything having to do with people, right? So maybe where I live, I'm facing some kind of discrimination based on my ethnicity, my race, my religion, right? Things about me that I'm not going to change, right? That's who I am. And therefore, I can't stay here. I'm not safe here. Or, I can't be myself here. I'm not celebrated for who I am. So I got to go. Other issues could include political, right? So maybe there's some sort of conflict or violence. If it's not safe where you live because there's a war going on, you need to leave, right? And maybe you leave because it's escalating, or maybe you left because your house was bombed, right? Either way, I can't stay here. I need to go. Another issue would just be like political opposition, right? So the people coming in power do not have my issues in mind. They're not going to protect me, or they might harm me. I need to get out of here. Last time I started talking a little bit about what was going on in Brazil, and I do want to bring that up a little bit right now. So, for example, Brazil is in the middle of an election, a presidential election. They just had their, like, all the parties run in one election, and now they go to a runoff where the top two run again, everyone votes again. So what's happening in Brazil right now is that one of those people who are going into the runoff is a very far right-wing, kind of scary person that's running, where he is very much, using a lot of the same issues that we deal with in this country right now, a lot of like Trump tactics. But he is the things that he is actually running on, the platforms are very anti a lot of people in Brazil. They're not necessarily in everyone's best interests. And so people in Brazil are scared. There are people who will leave Brazil if he's elected because of fear of what is going to happen. Fear that maybe one day I won't be able to leave. I need to leave now. So this is happening right now. It's possible he wins and things get worse and we see huge migrations from Brazil. That would be why. It could also be that you're not safe because you supported the other person. I don't know if that will be true in Brazil. It's a democracy. It technically shouldn't be true, but we'll see, right? So if the person in charge of your country is not, you voted for the other person, you may no longer be safe, right? In Nazi Germany, that was the case. If you weren't a Nazi, you were an enemy. Similar in like communist countries. So reasons to leave. All right. Other reasons to leave would be environmental, right? Natural disaster, drought. We just had a huge hurricane in the south, in Florida, Hurricane Michael. So if you live in that hurricane area, it's possible that your home was ruined and now I need to leave, right? Or some sort of drought, any kind of natural disaster. We're going to start seeing a lot more of migrants because of this reason, because of climate change, right? As things get worse in the tropics, people will leave those areas because they're affected more by natural disasters. A last final reason would be demographic. There could be some kind of like gender or age imbalance, right? Like people who live here are mostly older. Therefore, like, I don't want to stay here because I'm younger. Or there's a lot of, like, we'll talk about this later. A lot of like long distance migrants tend to be male. So if you live in a place where a lot of men have left, now there are a lot of women there, sort of a gender imbalance, right? So reasons to leave: I can't stay here. I need to find a husband. I need to move to the next city. A lot of people here have left. Or overpopulation. It's really crowded where I am. Therefore, I can't stay here, right? The conditions are not good. So push factors. In the chat, give me a 1 if you're like, I totally understand push factors. Give me a 0 if you're like, I kind of understand it. I'm not 100% yet. Or you can give me anywhere in between, any sort of decimal in between. So a 1 would be like, totally get it, on it. Push factors make total sense to me. Anything below that would be like, I don't know, kind of. All right, so we got some 1s, a 0.5, 0.8. Awesome. So for those of you that are not 1s, feel free to ask specific questions. Okay, so if push factors are like you're not 100% on them, ask a specific question where it says ask a question, and I'll loop back to you. Okay, so really want to make sure that you understand push factors, because it is so much, you have to understand these 2 things to understand the rest of migrations. Right. So just to like recap, push factor is just, why do people leave? Why do you move? Why move where you live? People don't necessarily want to leave where they are. Like, people don't generally like change. They want to live where they live. That's where my family is where my stuff is. I don't want to pack up and go. So what is it that makes me leave? So the other half to this is pull factors. So if I'm deciding to leave, it could be that I just want to go someplace else. It's not that where I am, I'm being pushed out of. It's just, I just want to live someplace else. So any of these could be true for someone who just wanted to go, one of these things is true, and then they pick up and go. It also can be true for someone who had to leave and then has to decide, where do I go, right? So if I have to go because of one of these push factors, where do I decide? What street, what city, what state, what country, how far am I going to go? So you've got economic pull factors. This would be opportunity. That's the biggest one. This is the biggest reason of why people leave places and why they go to places. They leave because of a lack of opportunities. They go because of opportunity, right? So I know that I can find a job in this other place, therefore I need to go there. So that's really those are the two most popular reasons. Other thing could be something social, right? Maybe in the place I live, I'm a minority, but over there, I'm a majority, right? I'm gonna be given different freedoms because of this, so it's worth it to go there. This you see a lot of. So, for example, I talked about Brazil before, just to like loop back. There, and this is true for any ethnicity. There are places in the U.S. where they're sort of like sister cities, right? You find a lot of people from one country or from within one culture. So, for example, where I grew up has a lot of Brazilians, and so my dad is Brazilian. When he moves to the U.S., where does he decide to go? He goes where he knows someone, and there are other Brazilians there that speak the same language that can help him. Plenty of people do this, right? You find these ethnic enclaves, right? If you move to New York City, where do I decide to live? Well, I am, from Somalia, and I want to live near people that speak the same language as me. Maybe I know someone or know someone who knows someone, so I'm going to choose that neighborhood. This works for every religion, every ethnicity. Other reasons could be political, peace, right? So my standards might not be like super high, but I live in a place with a war. I need to go someplace without a war. I don't have to go far. I need to find a place that is not in conflict. So people don't generally move to places with conflict, right? You're not going to like pick up and move right now to Syria, but people in Syria are picking up and moving to places that are peaceful. And then finally, environmental. So, safety, right? Like if you're in the hurricane's path, you need to get out of the path. So where are you going to go? You're going to just go north, right? So people living in southern Florida just now are migrating to northern Florida. They might not stay there. They're going to pick up and go back home, but I got to get out of the path. All right, so we got one question. Oh, the question is a 1. All right, so if you have a question, put it in here. But I'm going to... All right, let me get rid of that. So if you got a question, drop it in there. All right, so let's push and pull factors. I think that's... Oh, we got one more. So, okay, so the other demographic one, if you live in a place that's overpopulated, that's overcrowded, that's typically a stage 2 or 3 country, right? So when we're talking about the DTM, the demographic transition model. So if you live in a country that is within that stage, it might be overcrowded, especially within the cities. Therefore, it's worth it to move to stage 4 or 5 countries. This is what we tend to call, first world countries, just because they are developed, but we don't really use those terms anymore. So that's the reason to go to a place. All right, so moving forward. So again, y'all hit me up with questions. So now that I realize I have to leave and I've decided on where I want to go, there could be things that come in my way, right? So these things that come in your way, these are called intervening obstacles. They're literally just, I start with my origin. So right here, this is where I live. I got to leave. Some things are going to happen on my journey, whether I'm going, if I'm going far away, more things are going to happen on my journey. And then there's my destination. There's reasons to stay somewhere in the middle, right? I left Syria. I wanted to go to Germany. I got to Greece and I decided to stay there, or I had to stay there, right? Those could all be true. I got to, I left my village in Brazil and I moved to the big city in Brazil. And then the plan was to get on a plane to New York, but I couldn't because I couldn't get a visa. So I stayed in the big city. I'm still a migrant. I didn't make it to my final destination, either because I decided not to or because I couldn't do it. So, for example, an economic reason, a migrant could get a job. So you're on your way to your destination, you get a job to save some money, and you decide, I'm going to stay here. I have a job, things are okay. Or you fall in love, you get married, you have people, you become part of their family, so you stay. There's no reason to leave anymore, right? So I didn't know I was going to stop in Greece. I was going to keep going to Germany, but why go to Germany when now I, have basically a family in Greece? Excuse me, political. Can't get a visa. Visas are super hard to get and very bureaucratic. So if you can't get a visa, you go as far as you can, and then you might get stuck. Or just environmental, right? There's a sea. I got to get across this ocean. I got to get across these mountains, this river, whatever. So if I can't, I might just stay where I'm at. Okay. So intervening obstacles, that's an important term to remember. Like I said, human geography is just a lot of terms. So if you can remember these terms, you're good to go. Okay, so there are models that come up throughout all of human geography. In populations, there were the pyramids and the DTM and the epidemiological transition model. I think that was what it was. In migrations, this is one of them. This is Ravenstein's laws of migrations. So there's basically several different things that are generally true. This is all generalizations. Okay, so there are plenty of stories and cases that don't meet these laws. Laws sounds a little strict, but if you compile, all this data and you look at it, this is what tends to be true. And these are good to remember because you can make other assertions about patterns based on these. So if you get a question, for example, on a test that's asking you about like consequences of migrations, you can make generalizations about the consequences based on these things. So I'll show you examples of that. So most migrants travel short distances. This is because people don't generally want to go really far with all their stuff, right? That's hard. So, for example, if you're escaping from the hurricane, you aren't necessarily going to move to California. You're going to move to northern Florida or Georgia or, just a little bit further away. You don't need to go super far. Even if you're escaping from Syria, most Syrian migrants that left went to the countries right around, right? Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, because it's easier to get, closer to you than it is to go far. So most migrants travel short distances. Plenty of migrants go further, but most stay relatively close. That's why the country that has the most immigrants coming to the United States is Mexico, because Mexico is super close to us. So that makes sense. All right, number 2. Migrants who travel far usually settle in cities. So if you are going to go really far away to another country, another continent, typically these migrants will stay in a big city. You don't typically travel far away to settle in a remote area. Most migrants go to cities. Most migrations have several steps between origin and destination. This is why you have those intervening obstacles. Even if you're going someplace close, there's typically steps that you will have to take to get there. And then you might not stay. You might not, make it through all those steps. You might decide to stay someplace. But typically there's a lot of they'll go, for example, a migrant typically won't just go straight from origin to destination, right? They're not buying one-way tickets that go direct. They're instead have to walk a certain length of time, take a train, take a bus, take a plane, catch a ride somewhere. There's a lot of different variations of it, and it's typically complicated. All right, number 4. Most migrations in history have been rural to urban. So just as our history is that of movement, people used to live in rural societies. Now most people live in a city. Cities tend to just have more opportunities for jobs, for education. So most people live in cities. Each migration flow triggers a counter migration flow. And to keep in mind here, it doesn't mean that they are equal. So while we have a lot of migrants coming from Mexico to the United States, there are also a good number of people who go from the United States to Mexico that move there, that will retire in Mexico. It's not the same number, but it's a counter migration. It's like once one thing opens up, one connection between two places, then people will move both ways, always. And it's not always that it's not always equal, but people will move both ways. Most migrants are younger adults, so they're usually between like 20, 45 years old. Obviously, there are younger migrants that travel alone even. And then, of course, there are older migrants, but usually the migrants are younger, right? It's hard. It's not easy to travel long distances, so this is your like prime time to do it. And then finally, people who travel internationally. So if you're going to another country, these tend to be male. The idea is that the male will go ahead, then bring the family later, while migrants within a country tend to be female. This is because females will tend to like move to where their husbands are, for example, or move to where their families are. So inside of a country tends to be female, outside of the country tends to be male. All right. Let's see. Give me an emoji of how you're feeling right now on migrations. Whatever emoji you want. Or if you can't do emojis, then I don't know, a word of like, how are you feeling about migrations? I feel, good. I feel not so good. I feel confused. I feel on fire. However you are in the chat. Thumbs up is good. Thumbs up is good. All right. These are good. All right. I'll let you guys continue to do that. I'm going to keep moving forward. All right. So we're going to talk a little about history. Okay. So have you guys taken a history class before? I'm going to kind of just hit on some world history stuff. So it looks like you guys feel pretty good about migrations. Like I said before, for human geography, you don't need to know dates and times and names of, old dead white guys. For world history, you will, but for this, you don't. You just need to understand these like patterns, especially cause and effect. So I'm going to kind of highlight a couple of major migrations in history that sometimes appear on exams. Sometimes they'll be in FRQs or in multiple choice questions. So it's important to be familiar with these terms and these events. So one of the biggest factors of migrations in the last several centuries is colonialism. So the fact that like Europeans colonized most of the world affected migrations because people would move between these countries, but also it spread culture. So now, English is spoken so widely because Britain had control of so much of the world. And that affects migrations, right? If you're moving from one place to the other, having the ability to speak to each other is useful. And we're going to talk more about languages in a few weeks. But this map is like crazy to me. So you have the purple is Europe, right? So you have Europe, you have Russia there. So that's all Europe. Everything that's green was at some point controlled or colonized by Europe. Everything that's that like, bright color green, that's almost the entire world was at some time colonized or controlled by Europe. So it's not just Britain, it's Germany, it's France, it's Netherlands, Italy, Belgium. Like these are sort of like the bigger countries, Russia, and so all of these countries around the world in South America and most of Africa, right, in Southeast Asia, have been colonized before. And so what would happen during colonization, especially after a country became independent, is that you would see a lot of migrations. So, for example, in Algeria, which is in North Africa, right here, yeah, I think this one's Algeria. Yeah, I think this is Libya, this is Algeria. So if right here, Algeria becomes independent from France in 1962. And right after that civil war, people start moving to France. Why do they move to France? Because they speak the language, right? I'm from Algeria. I speak French because the French had colonized Algeria. So if I need to move, it's easiest to go to a place that speaks the same language as me. So let's see what else we have here. European sphere of influence. So yellow just means they weren't actually controlled, but they were kind of underneath that sphere. But look, it's just crazy. It's like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 countries in the world, 5 countries that were never colonized by Europe. It's insane, y'all. It's a lot of long-term effects of that. Okay. All right, so we talked about migration being sometimes forced and sometimes voluntary. So the two, if you're forced, you're physically forced to go or kicked out of a place, and in some cases brought to another place. If you're voluntary, then you're choosing to go, although I think that's a little bit, there's something that is happening and you are now choosing to go. You're not being actually forced to go. So, if I can't find a job here, I am kind of being forced, but I'm voluntarily moving. I could stay. So obviously one of the biggest forced migrations ever in world history is the Atlantic slave trade. So through the slave trade, what is it? 10 million people, 15 million people were transported from Western Africa to the Americas. So that's a lot of people that have a lot of descendants today. And these people only, these descendants only live in North and South America because of the slave trade, right? They would not have left Africa otherwise. One thing that's interesting to know with the slave trade, as Americans, we tend to think that we are the center of the world and of history, but actually most slaves were brought to Brazil. 5 million slaves were brought to Brazil. And then the next most would be the West Indies, right? These like Caribbean islands, Haiti, Dominican Republic, these places here that had 4.5 million. So we only, in the United States, in the southern United States, for a portion of it, also the north and then the south, 500,000 slaves were brought here, and then a ton more to other places. So the reason why there's so many in the West Indies and Brazil is because for them, their main cash crops were sugar, and sugar is really intensive to harvest. And so a lot of people died harvesting sugar. So they would have to bring in more and more slaves to replace them. Whereas in the United States, for us was our cash crops were more like tobacco and cotton, which are also incredibly intensive, but not as intensive, and the heat is not as bad as it is closer to the equator. So, which, by the way, what I just did there, how I just kind of talked about like the difference between the crops and the climate, that's human geography, right? We're talking about a historical moment, but we're looking at it in relation to the geography, right? The movement of people based on geography. Like that's what we're doing here. That's what human geography is all about. All right, here's another type of forced migrations is when you're just displaced, or a refugee. So if there's a war happening or you are being targeted because of your religion, ethnicity, race, anything, then you are now a displaced person. Someone from Washington, D.C. is calling me. Maybe I said something I shouldn't have. So anyways, right. So one of the, what happens then when people are displaced like this is what's called a diaspora. And that's where you get people no longer living in their homeland anymore. They're kind of spread around the world. So, for example, there's a European Jewish diaspora where you have people who have connections to European Jewry, Jewish history in Europe, but no longer live in Europe. They live all around the world. So you can see two maps here. First is just the like movement of European Jews from Europe to Israel right after World War II. So a lot of people were displaced. Things were wrecked after World War II. Israel became a state in 1948, and so people moved to Israel because safety, right? Safety in numbers. I'm a minority here. I'm being attacked and being discriminated. If I move there, I'm part of a majority. Therefore, I'm safe. And then they also moved around the entire world. So the top map there is kind of showing you, there's a huge number of like Jewish communities in Canada, in Argentina, in Brazil, in Australia, in South Africa, China. Shanghai has a pretty huge Jewish community because people moved everywhere. Easier to move close. So Israel looks good when you live in, Poland because it's not that far. But if I can get a visa, if I can get passage to Argentina, to Australia, to someplace else, then I would. Farther the better too. So this is one type of displaced persons, refugees. We've got a lot of refugee issues today coming out of, like, for example, Central America, where, there's a lot of violence in Honduras, for example, and people have to leave. It's not safe. So they are making their way through the rest of Central America, through Mexico, coming to the United States, or staying in Mexico because it's not safe there. People leaving Syria, people will soon be leaving the tropics, like I said, because of climate change. It will eventually get too hot to stay. Natural disasters will be too much. People will leave. They become climate refugees, which is an actual term that's had people register as before. So as part of that, another type of forced migration is disaster. So this is a map of where people left after Hurricane Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, and what does it say? It says it distributed to over 1 million people, almost 1.5 million people left New Orleans and went out to other places. Where they moved to depended on all those pull factors we talked about. A lot of people, so you can see most people stayed close or relatively close in eastern Texas, in other parts of Louisiana, in Alabama, Mississippi, Florida. Most people stayed relatively close. A lot of people also traveled to Chicago, to St. Louis. You can see these red dots in the big cities, right? In Detroit, in Boston, in New York, in Atlanta, in LA. Right? People move to big cities because most people that move far move to cities. Same thing applies here. The other thing is that you're most likely to know other people in a city. There's just more people in a city. So a lot of people would move to where they knew people, right? If I have an aunt or a cousin or a friend, someone that lives someplace else, it might be worth it for me to pick up and move there because I know someone, right? Rather than moving close and knowing no one. So people moved everywhere. These were forced migrations because houses were ruined. I can't stay where I am anymore. My house was ruined, so we have to go, right? My school was ruined. We have to go. Okay, I've got a few more for you. So, all right. So a couple of trends that you need to know in the United States would be, this is sort of like a graph that shows where immigrants are coming from to the U.S. over time. This is from the 1820s to around now. And there's a couple of trends that are really worth knowing. So, for example, in the early part of the 19th century, so in this time period, let me turn on this little, I think you can see this, yeah? Yeah, okay. So in this time period right here, this 1830s to 1840s, this is this wave of migration mostly came from Western Europe. So you can see Ireland, Germany, UK, I guess Canada is part of that a little bit. But right here is mostly coming from Western Europe. Then that will start to decline. The reason why Ireland right here peaks so much is because of the Irish potato famine. These other places here, Germany has a revolution right here in 1848. That would be a reason for a peak right there. And then Germany unifies over here, reasons for a peak over here in the 1880s. Then it flips. So knowing that the earlier migrants to the US tended to be from Western Europe. So if you're writing this down, write that down. Then the shift here, this is where migrants tend to be from Eastern Europe. So it totally shifts, Eastern and Southern Europe. So you see Italy, Russia, Hungary. We've got Mexico will start in here. Canada is always going to be part of it because it's close. But the shift right here is that Western Europe was kind of no more. And then here is when Eastern Europe starts flowing in. Okay, so right around the turn of the century is when that happens. During the World Wars, there is a lot of movement right after, for sure. But in that in-between time, this right here is so low because of the Depression, right? So while the United States is in a depression, there's no opportunity here for the people who are already here. If I'm stuck, the Depression was global, but if I'm stuck someplace else, I'm not going to go to the U.S. while I can't find a job there. So there wasn't a lot of immigration to the US in this time. Within the US, there was a ton, but to the US, not so much. Okay, so then we got here. So obviously Germany after World War II, same with Hungary, with Eastern Europe, everyone's kind of migrating. Now the trends are more Southeast Asia and Latin America. So Mexico is like far and away has, most immigrants that come to the United States are from Mexico. However, the next bigger ones are China, are Philippines, Vietnam. Vietnam will be a big one right in here because of the Vietnamese War. So, again, it kind of goes Western Europe, South and Eastern Europe, and then Latin America and Asia is more now. Okay, let me just check. All right, I think I skipped one by accident. Okay, so countries can affect migration in two ways. They can encourage it or discourage it, right? They can put up programs and policies that will encourage people to move to their state, their country, their city, or they can put up policies that ban it or discourage it. Don't come here, right? So some examples of policies to encourage migrations would be the Homestead Act. This is in 1862. It's literally, if you move to this land, we'll give you the land for free if you will build on it for a certain amount of years. I think 5 years. So a lot of people moved. Iowa, Nebraska, a lot of the like Western, Midwest and West was populated because of that. If I'm in this city, it's overcrowded, and you're telling me you'll give me, what does it say? It's super cheap or free. So you're telling me you'll give me land. All I got to do is move there and work the land. Great. I'm in, right? Another example would be guest worker programs. So a lot of countries do this where there's programs. So like they'll incentivize people to move temporarily, come work here for, X amount of months, and then you'll go back to your country and you'll make more here, right? So there's a lot of these programs in like in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, UAE. I think in the US, I'm actually not sure. So then, of course, policies to limit migrations. So the US is pretty notorious for these because our history tends to be xenophobic, where we have this like fear of outsiders. So, one example would be the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, where first California did it, and then the federal government was like, that's a great idea, we'll do that too, where they literally banned all immigration coming from China. Another example would be the quotas, 1921 and 1924. What's interesting about this is what they did. I'm going to go back to this to show you what they did. What they did, so 1921, and this is another reason why you have this dip too. So the Depression is part of it, but it's also like now there's laws that limit migration. It's probably a bigger part of it, if I had to guess. What they did is 1921, they said, okay, we're gonna figure out we're gonna look at the number of immigrants coming to the U.S. and where they're coming from, and we're gonna say, okay, every year, we're gonna apply a quota. So I'm not explaining this very well. So, for example, in 1921, they based their numbers off of 1890 or 1880, right around here. Said, okay, now look, this many Germans came in, Germans were X% of all immigrants that came in. So we're going to allow a similar number of Germans to move in. Same thing with, British, Irish, any UK, right? However, that's not who was trying to move then, right? So we're going to apply these quotas based on the census that's 30, 40 years old, when the people who are potentially darker colored skin weren't coming to the US then. We're going to make sure they don't come to the US now, right? You don't have a lot of Chinese immigrants coming because of the Exclusion Act, right? So the numbers of Chinese coming in after the Exclusion Act obviously plummets because they're not allowed. And then they base these quota numbers off of that. Well, there was no Chinese coming then, so we'll make sure that those numbers are low now. So it's like, that's pretty much how policies to limit migrations work. That's some of the ones that have happened before. Obviously, we have those again. We have these like ban on Muslim countries. Other countries do the same thing, right? As xenophobia spreads, they have quotas, laws, whatever to limit migration. So looks like you guys are not really taking advantage of asking questions. So I just want to give you a chance to like post any questions you have about migrations. When you guys have, I don't know when you have tests coming up, if you've already done it. And I'm also going to take requests for next week. So what topic would you like me to go over next Monday? So usually we do these on Mondays. This week's on Sunday. It is what it is. But so far we've done live sessions on, we had 2 on population. We had 1 on unit 1, and moving forward, are you guys already in culture? Are you starting culture, like folk and pop culture? Or is there something else you want me to do a session on, like note taking or studying, whatever. I'm here for you. So if you want the replays, by the way, of any of those sessions that we've already done, you'll need to become a member of Fiveable. And in the month of October, it's just $20, which is hella cheap considering it'll save you a bunch of money in college. So that button is right there. But let me just put up I'm just asking this question. So type it in the chat. I'm thinking of doing next week on folk and popular culture. Give me a 1 in the chat if you're like, that's perfect. That's exactly what I need next week. If it's not what you need, then give me a suggestion of something else. So folk and popular culture is like what you want to review next week. Give me a 1. If you'd prefer that we talk about something else, then let me know what you want. You can request anything. Please do a session of studying and note-taking. All right, so studying and note-taking, I can definitely do a session on. I'll probably do a bonus session on this, maybe even this week. And we'll kind of go over note-taking together. We'll look at a book and sort of like take notes on it together. And so that you can kind of see, like, there's a lot of ways that you can take notes, and it really is something that you have to, like, make work for you. But I think I'll do a bonus session on that this week because I know that a lot of students want that. So, all right. Well, with that said, that's the end of tonight. So this replay will be available for the next day, and then you'll have to become a member to watch it again. So I will be emailing out any updates about a note-taking session. So make sure to, check your email for that, and I'll let you guys know when it is. Thursday seems like a good day to do that. And if you have any questions between now and Thursday, you can pop into the Facebook group for Human Geography. If you just search Human Geography students, it comes up. Or you can feel free to email me or, let me know of what you need help with. All right, that was it. Peace.